So welcome to all of you to this first session of the Pacifica Graduate Institute's Advanced Training Certificate in Ecopsychology. And congratulations on taking this step. I'm Laura Lee Scott, Director of Pacifica Online, and I'm really thrilled that you're here. And I'm excited for all of you for a couple of reasons. One, I'm excited for you to meet and connect and work with an incredible faculty of pioneering trailblazers. Their scholarship and their activism are internationally recognized. In addition, I guess, equally excited for you to connect with each other, your fellow learners from around the world. This is a really diverse, interesting, and exciting group of learners. So I am thrilled for all of you. I want to introduce you to one of the key faculty members and your presenter for today and in the coming weeks, Andy Fisher. For those of you who may not be familiar with Andy or with his work, he's a major figure in ecopsychology, having tracked and reflected on the development of the field for the last 3 decades. He's the author of one of the field's primary texts, Radical Ecopsychology, Psychology in the Service of Life. He's probably best known for his critical scholarship and holistic vision of the ecopsychological project. He keeps up an active schedule of teaching and writing while also practicing as a rite of passage guide, mentor, and psychotherapist in private practice. So Andy, thank you so much for your ongoing participation in this advanced training certificate. We're thrilled that you're here with us, and welcome.
Great, thanks, Laura Lee. And I'll just mention, I see them at the top of my screen, but we also have today Katie Stone, who's the TA for Group 1, and Mary Laura, who's the TA for Group 2.
Hey,
Thank you for that.
You're seeing our team here. So yes, welcome everyone. This 13-week ride you're about to take. So we're kicking it off this week. Hopefully you're all sort of finding your seats and your way through the routine of the week. But I'll talk a bit more about the routine in a moment. But I've been reading a lot of your initial posts, your introductions, and so I thought I'd say, hello myself here a little more before we get to some of the logistics for the program. So I want to start with a territorial acknowledgement. I live and work in unceded Algonquin territory, or Omami Winini, meaning the downstream people in the valley of the Kitchissippi, which is known as the Ottawa River right here in sort of central Canada. And it's really one of the most colonized areas of Canada. We've got our nation's capital here, Ottawa. And so it's an area, there's an Algonquin scholar, Lynn Gell, and she says this is the most colonized area in Canada. It was just certainly on the Ontario side of Algonquin territory, because it was just very rapidly settled in the 19th century. Our nation's capital, Ottawa, is right on an Algonquin sacred site. And so there's this whole, psychological phenomenon, the land here, where our nation's capital sits right in the heart of Algonquin territory. But the presence of the Algonquins has been very repressed. So that, as I say, creates a certain psyche in the land here. But the Algonquins are very much here and asserting their jurisdiction. And, these lands are still the lands that they have jurisdiction over. And, they're beautiful lands, this land of forest and lakes and sort of this rocky landscape that we live in here. I always imagine that I'm living within Indigenous sovereignty here, Algonquin sovereignty here. These are really important moves to make as an ecopsychologist, as I said in my first lecture, because it's all about the psychology of our relationship with the land, and this land has a history. We need to know that, and we have to respect that, because it's big part of what's playing out psychologically in these places. And I've been involved in an Indigenous solidarity group here for a number of years, and it's as an act of sort of responsibility as an eco-psychologist. So it's an interesting place to be, and I wanted to just share a little bit more about that. Okay, so that's a little about me and my place. I'm no longer working as a psychotherapist, by the way. Laurie's intro. I need to change that little detail, but I closed my practice to sort of go much more deeply into this work, and I've been working with trade unions, and I'm trying to write a new book, but that's a hard thing to do. The subject matter is very complex, as you can well imagine, and I think you'll get a picture of that. So why don't I now speak a little bit about some of the logistics for the course, and we'll get to the point where we can have some chat and questions and answers. But I thought it'd be important to go through some of these things, because every year there's often a lot of, what are we supposed to do, and when's things due. I think it's useful just to run through some of these things. So first of all, if you go to the homepage for the program, in the upper right side, you'll see links saying course requirements and expectations, and an overview of the weekly sessions. And if you haven't already done that, then click on those links and take a look, because it really lays it all out for you there, and answers a lot of the questions that people typically have. So I just wanted to flag that off the top. And I also wanted to suggest, I try in the material that I've outlined in the my outline for my part of the program, just a very simple sort of skeleton of what we're doing here. So every week there's just 5 things that you have to do just to keep this in mind. So the first is, watch the presentation. There's a video presentation that each of the instructors will have. So watch that. There's some readings, videos, to spend some time with. And, you'll see, especially on, well, I think all of us include quite a bit. There's quite a few articles and videos and things that I list for each week. And sometimes people, especially if they come into the course late, they're like, holy mackerel, this is overwhelming. There's so much stuff. And you don't have to do all of it. It's just there for you as a resource. You spend an hour or two a week on that reading, and that's fine. And there's 1 or 2 pieces that I recommend each week. And then the rest is just a matter of what you have time for, or what you're interested in, or what you want to put away for the future. So please don't feel or get the idea that you need to be reading everything that's on the page. I mean, I can imagine keeping up myself. So please be aware of that. Videos, presentation, readings, and then every week there's an assignment where you need to post a couple of paragraphs on the discussion, under this discussion tab on the homepage. So that's well underway at this point. People have been saying hello, and then the 4th piece is commenting on other people's postings on the discussion page. So we ask that you post at least 2 comments on other people's postings, and that gets discussion going between folks. And one of the feedback we get over and over again is that it's meeting the other participants that's been such a valuable part of this experience. So do take advantage of that, and try to keep up with that too, because then you're connecting with the current conversation. And then the 5th piece, the final piece, is the live session. So if you're here today, then you're right on track with that piece. So if you just think of those 5 things every week, that's all you have to do. And the final project for the course is just the 13th assignment. So I'm not sure if it's been posted yet. Garrett, our instructor for the last 3 weeks, this is his first year doing it, and I don't think he's loaded on his stuff yet. But the assignment for week 13 will just be a final summation for you, thinking of a kind of project, a real world project that you can imagine using what you gathered in the course, in whatever area of the course you want to focus on, and think of something, sort of a 1-page, 250-word kind of write-up of a real world project that you could imagine based on what you've learned in the program. So keep that in mind as well. On my readings in particular, I just want to note, that some of the material is on the academic side. Some of the language is kind of dense, and please don't worry about that. If it's not making sense or it's getting a little boggy, just get what you can, because it's really not going to matter that much in the end. And I'm certainly happy to clarify anything in the live sessions. The reason I use that language is because ecopsychology is something very different. It's something very transformational, and it doesn't have a lot of credibility yet within the academy, and it's considered something sort of lightweight or flaky. And so a lot of my work has been about trying to give the field some scholarly legs. And so I've been trying to illustrate the kind of intellectual traditions that exist that can actually do that for the field, and using the traditions that make sense for us rather than having to fall into conventional psychological methodologies and understandings of the world. So so that's why I'm doing that. Just so you know, I'm working in my recent writings on a more accessible language, more plainer language, but not a lot of that's in print yet. So you're just going to have to read the more academic language of some of my older writings. Okay, so on D2L, you will find as well a document, just an outline of my part of the program. So I wanted to flag that. Just because it doesn't really say a lot more than's already on the D2L platform. There's a little bit more about the next week's readings, but it's sort of in one place gives you my part of the program if that's useful for you. So I just wanted to note that. If you have any IT questions, it's not my area. But there is an IT support line, and I think you've been all sent a resource guide with some of this material in it. So Fios, she is the lead education technology administrator, so you can always contact them. So that's the IT stuff. In the discussion forums, you've probably gathered by now that there's 2 groups. And the reason we did this is because there's a lot of people. I think 78 at the last count. And so just to make the conversations more manageable, we divided it in 2 groups. And that's why Katie and Mary are assigned to these different groups, and they're there to help you with any questions as well. For these live sessions, please be aware that the camera's on, and or if your camera's on rather, because some people are aware when their camera's on, and then they're not necessarily presentable or are in a mode where they'd want to be seen. So so please be aware of your cameras, because these sessions do get recorded, and you want to be visible in the way that you'd want to be visible. Okay, so that's some of the logistical stuff. And I'm just wondering if there's any questions off the top about that. If Katie and Mary, you could just see if anybody, if you want to just use the reaction button, raising hands.
I don't see any questions, but I will just add, as far as watching your postings and managing the technology, just send one of the TAs an email if you want to double check that you're meeting those 2 responses per discussion week. Sometimes it can get a little confusing, and sometimes students will be surprised thinking they have met the requirements, but suddenly they haven't. So just reach out anytime if you want to double check.
Great, thanks, Katie. Yeah, and as I say, there can be a lot of, seems like there's a lot going on to begin with, but once you get into the routine, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so now I just wanted to say a bit about the rationale for my going first in this program, which is a change from the first year we did it in 2019. Craig Chalkwis went first, and I was actually last. But part of the feedback we got in the first year was like we got to me last, and then people were saying, well, I would have preferred this go first, because my focus is like the project of ecopsychology as a whole. So so it was thought that be useful for me to go first because it kind of sets the context for everybody else. And then we also added the lecture you've seen for this week on the history of ecopsychology, which adds some additional context. And then Janine came on board last year, and she starts in week 3. And we used to do it just sort of 3 chunks, but now we've got 4 instructors, and Janine kind of weaves through in this way that we think is useful. And then Garrett was added this year to replace Craig. So the whole thing is constantly evolving. Part of what it means for me going first, because I set context for the whole program, we thought that was useful. But it does mean that my work is, very emphatic on the radical side of ecopsychology, which means you're getting a lot of this kind of heavy material right off the top. And if you're unfamiliar with some of this material, it can kind of rock your boat. So do be aware of that, that this is the sequencing of the programming, and we're always interested in hearing at the end of the 13 weeks how that worked for you. As I say, we put me up front because of that feedback initially, and we're constantly evolving the program. So please do let us know how it worked. And my part of the program as well is very ideas driven. Because of this role that I've given myself in the field to do this constant kind of critical reflection on what makes sense for a psychology that calls itself ecological. I think this is just a really crucial aspect of developing the field. So the ideas are really important to me. It's not as if this is the only way I work as an ecopsychologist, but for the purposes of this program, it's what you get from me. So if you're really hungry for some of the more experiential stuff, you can know that that's also going to be present in with some of the other presenters. Okay. So so why don't I just say a few more words about the routine for the live session, and then we can get to it. So we found in the past, as I said, that we've got this this large group of people. It's been kind of hard to manage the conversations in the live sessions as well. So if everybody's kind of speaking from the floor, it's kind of hard to manage it all. So what we started setting up a couple years ago is this routine of asking people to submit their questions for the live sessions ahead of time. So the deadline for this is Thursday at noon Pacific time. Starting next week, there should be a post in both of the groups pinned right at the top, with something saying like, put your questions for the live session here. So it'll be pinned there. So just right at the top of the page for each week, you can enter your questions or comments for the live sessions there if you want to pre-submit something. And what that allows is for me to take that question and chew on it a little bit and have something sort of ready for the Friday live session. All my live sessions are on the Friday. And then that'll form, you know, a large part of the live session. And then we'll also make space though for what comes up out of those questions, people entering questions into the chat, raise your hand, all that kind of stuff. We'll still make a space for that. But in order to help things go more smoothly, the pre-submission and my sort of preparing responses for that is what we found worked best in the past. And because of that, it's a lot of like what's happening right now. It's a lot of you're sitting there with your mics off and listening to me talk, which always feels a little odd to me. So because of that, we've also added at the end of the hour, if you want more conversation, stick around and we'll do some breakout rooms. So we'll have about 20-minute of breakout room time where you can get into a smaller group and maybe meet some people who aren't in your discussion group as well. So, you know, 3 or 4 people in a group, and we'll make a bit of time for that and some sharing at the end as well. And so if you stick around for the whole thing, that'd be an hour and a half of your day. But certainly no requirement to do the breakout room session. It's really just if you're more interested in some conversation with your participants. Okay, so the agenda for today, it's mostly about just opening up the conversation. You know, this week's presentation was about the history of ecopsychology, which is a lot about how to sort of characterize this field. What is ecopsychology? How do we talk about it? Where's it going? What are the urgent issues it has to address? You know, anything about my presentation or the readings or the videos or my own involvement in the field, I've been at this for a while now. I started my graduate work in 1990, and so this all sort of started rolling around that time. And so there's a lot of memory I have of how this thing's been going. So if you want to ask about any of that, by all means. And I can also share some more of my ideas about today's theme if that seems like a good idea. But there weren't any pre-submitted questions this week, which is pretty standard for week 1. I mean, things are just getting started and we're just introducing ourselves. But if you want to, at this point, to get the ball rolling, if there's anybody who wants to type a question in the chat or use the reaction button to, you know, raise your hand, say, yeah, I got a question, then we can maybe just gather a bit to see what's here and then take it from there. So I'll just give a pause here and just see what emerges. All right, so I'm assuming Katie and Mary, you're not seeing anything at this point? Nothing in the chat?
That's correct, yes.
That's correct. Okay. Okay, so maybe what I could do is share a bit more just on the theme of this week. And if anything occurs to you to ask a question, then so I see a question from Ida. Is that in the chat? Mary, you catching that?
Oh, they may have sent that to you directly.
Yeah, no, I'm not seeing it.
So yeah, make sure when you post a question that it says to everyone, because Andy won't be able to scroll through those.
Okay. So, yeah, I see, I just opened my chat and I'm seeing this from,
Okay.
I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Ida. Hello, what called you to ecopsychology in the 1990s and what did that look like? Okay, what called me to it? Well, I think I talk, yeah, in the next lecture, you'll hear me talk a bit about how I came to ecopsychology. So, so you can know that's coming. But I will say that, I mean, I was working as an environmental engineer and it was just terrible. It was the worst thing I could have done. But it was very important in a way, in terms of like, that's not what I'm interested in, or that's not how to go at it. Like, it's not an engineering problem. And so I went to York University, their environmental studies program really is a place you can reinvent yourself. It's an interdisciplinary program. You can come up with any kind of, because environmental studies can mean just about anything. So you just design a program, and as long as you can find profs to work with, then off you go. Which is kind of maybe useful for people to know, because a lot of people wonder, how do you study ecopsychology? I mean, where do you go and how do you do it? And I find a lot of these kind of interdisciplinary programs, geography programs, where as long as you can get profs to sign off on what you're doing, you can do something, you know, reinventive. And it was a simultaneous process of reinventing myself as well as you know, trying to find a way into this crisis that was meaningful to me. Theodore Roszak wrote his book, The Voice of the Earth, and it got published in 1992. And what had drawn me to, as you'll hear me speak about next week, to environmental studies was radical ecology. It was the thing that made sense of my life. And then the way ecopsychology was being developed, I mean, I was happy to hear the word being mentioned. It was a word that I started using myself just because it seemed obvious to put ecology and psychology together. And although Roszak was saying some fairly radical things and entertaining socially critical points of view, his politics was actually very mainstream. And he wanted to get sort of mainstream psychotherapists and mainstream environmentalists together, and he wanted to really appeal to a kind of professional class because he thought that was the way to get it rolling. And so that was the flavor of it at the beginning. But at the same time, it was all this very eclectic, you know, David Abrams and Chellis Glendennings and a lot of really sort of what have now been sort of framed as countercultural folks trying to get this field going. So it didn't really have a very strong center to it. It was more this sort of cast of characters playing with these ideas, and then this sort of very mainstream kind of political project that Roszak was promoting. So so I thought it was exciting and also a bit of a mess. so again, that's why I tried to pull some scholarship together that could really show how this thing was operating as a whole, as a radical whole. If you take what people were talking about as ecopsychology and sort of discern what was going on, there was actually, you could see a project. And so that's what I was trying to do. But it was a very exciting time. It was very heady times. You know, there were lots of videos and conferences and things going on. And then it just kind of lost its steam pretty quickly in the late 90s. And that's what made way for the second generation of ecopsychology, which I talked about in the history lecture for this week. So that's maybe just a bit of the flavor in those early days. But the concern I'd had, like there's a couple of people like Joanna Macy and Mary Watkins who are really there at the beginning, and they're still very strong figures in the field, I think. But a lot of the other folks, you know, they haven't really carry the energy forward. And that's why I think this third generation is so important. So, so I see another question in the chat, but I'm wondering, Mary, are you tracking anything or?
Yeah, I've been entering them into the Google Doc.
Oh, okay, right. Why don't I take a look at that? So we have this secret document. Oops. What is this? Minimize myself here. Okay. Okay, so Rachel asks, I'm interested in knowing how the current conversation about climate change impacts the direction of ecopsychology today. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer. I think a lot of, part of the difficulty is I'm like in my own work, I'll sort of distinguish my own work. It's about trying to understand what form of climate politics I want to align with. In that most climate politics is, you know, trying to electrify everything and green the grid. And, you know, it's a lot about communication of the science and these, you know, and there's a lot of talk about a just transition as well. But what do we mean by that? And so for me, you know, my politics are very much about worker-led, indigenous-led climate politics. And so that's where I'm focusing. Because that's where I think the sort of struggle with power is most explicit. And otherwise, we're in this kind of more of a kind of psychological politics of overcoming denial rather than more of a material struggle with, you know, the power that has, you know, the ability to, you know, privatize everything and to enclose everything and grab everything. That this is where the politics of this moment in history is most most accurately for me characterized, and where the struggle is most needs to be pointed. So, you know, that's me in particular. And then I know for, you know, a lot of ecopsychologists, it's about the anxiety and the despair around climate and organizing ways of, you know, containing that anxiety, and certainly aligning with outfits like the climate psychology outfits. Like, where's the line between ecopsychology and climate psychology? You know, what's the psychologist for climate psychology? I can't remember. There's a name of a somebody else may know it, but there are groups that are forming in order to organize around climate psychology. And, you know, and I've had a little involvement with that, but the conversation hasn't been in line with the kind of approach I've developed, and so I haven't really stuck. Climate Psychology Alliance, thanks, Garrett. Yeah, so the Climate Psychology Alliance is an outfit that started in the States, and there's a Canadian version that, you know, I've been sort of tugged into a little bit. So there's lots of things going on, and I wouldn't know how to characterize it exactly, or what's ecopsychology and what's climate psychology. You know, these boundaries are very fuzzy. But to say in terms of my own approach, it hasn't really spoken to me, the people developing climate psychology. Okay, so Rebecca is happy to talk, and maybe this would be a good moment, Rebecca, if you want to jump in, unmute yourself.
I am very new to eco psychology, so I don't feel like I can answer the questions very much. Part of why I'm taking the class is because I'm interested in the deeper history of this work and the larger systemic thinking of this work in the field. And I came to Climate Psychology Alliance with the urgency of climate questions and realized that it has much deeper roots. So I don't feel like I can speak very much to the differences yet, because that's why I'm here. But at some point, I'm very happy to talk about Climate Psychology Alliance of North America. I don't think I want to here, because I'd like to be able to understand a little bit more how it's connecting or diverging from eco-psychology. Super interested in the question and invested with everyone else to understand it a lot better.
Great, thanks, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I'm working with a trade union now, and it's very involved in climate politics, and it's a postal union. How do we repurpose this entire postal infrastructure for the purposes of climate change? But it's also very much about these struggles that I've been talking about on a very political level, and so that's what's been appealing to me. And then that's an existing institution, and then I'm bringing eco-psychological ideas to this place, rather than having some sort of psychological body that then goes and deals with the crisis. There's this existing institution, I'm bringing eco-psychology to it. So that's been this sort of strategy that I've adopted to take advantage of a collective struggle that's underway, and then bringing this eco-psychological sort of flavoring and sort of redirection to it. Okay. Oh, and just something Rebecca said made me think of something as well, is that, radical eco-psychology, which is what you'll be hearing about from me, is about these more deep understanding of the deep roots of the crisis. And, generally, the more you connect the dots and you see how deeply interwoven the crisis is, the more troubling it becomes. Like, if you're working in a very mainstream way, there's some problems, but we can deal with them, and with our existing tools. Just got to get the price right on the market, or and a lot of climate politics is about this, getting the right price and on carbon, and we can just repurpose our technologies and let the market fix things, and we're good to go. But the more deeply you look at eco-psychology, for me, it's about connecting psyche and nature. But once you sign on to that, you realize that, well, you can't separate psyche from society, and you can't separate nature from society, and then you're into all this social stuff. And then when you start trying to weave all that together, you're in much more challenging territory than we typically tend to imagine. And then we got to really scratch our heads hard and really think about how we're organizing and how we're practicing. So that's part of the message here. And I guess my answer around climate is sort of illustrating that a little bit. Okay, so why don't I go back to the Julien Francois, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Among the different schools of psychotherapy, you picked Gestalt for your own training, is that correct? Yes, it is. If yes, is it because Gestalt was, in your view, the best link with the ecological? Could you say a little bit more about that? Sure. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that was a long time ago. I did my Gestalt therapy training in the 90s. But yes, I mean, Gestalt therapy understands the psyche ecologically. like if ecology is about the interrelationship between organisms and environment, you can't talk about an organism separate from the environment. So an organism is a process, is an environmental process, not something, not something that you insert into an environment. That's why animals and zoos are, it's that's an entirely different environment. And is that really a lion that you're seeing if it's not in its normal environment? It's also why the phrase "the environment" is, a really ideological kind of deception, because in my view, because there's no such thing as the environment, because we're talking about organisms in relationship to environments. It kind of makes, if you say the environment, kind of makes humans the species. There's organisms in relationship with environments, and we're all environments for one another. And so to say the environment is something that splits the environment away from society, as if it's external to society. And then we can think about how, like, the capitalism affects the environment, rather than understanding that capitalism operates entirely through this so-called environment. Mm. And so it keeps this mental disconnection between society and nature. And so you can have, like, I often use this example in Canada. We have the TD Bank, and there's this TD Friends of the Environment, right? Friends of the Environment. Like this bank that's bankrolling the energy projects all over the planet, and putting children in cages and borders. Somehow it's a friend of the environment, and you can get away with that because we have these mental disconnects between what's going on in society and how that interrelates with what we call the environment. So Gestalt therapy, to get back to the question, it says you can't talk about an organism separate from an environment, as they say in ecology, and that's why it fits so nicely with ecopsychology. The problem is that Gestalt therapy was developed in this very individualistic way and was mostly talking about sort of built environments. But if we're an environment-making species, as we are, and all this environment making that the system of capital does. I mean, capitalism, it operates through moving around the planet, making environments, in the interest of accumulating capital. And so you can take something like Gestalt therapy, which works very experientially with how the experiential field that we're in, the environment we're in. You put ourselves in a different environment, you get a different being, different arising of experience. But we can politicize that by talking about ourselves as an environment-making species. And then what are the forces, the social forces, the political forces that make these environments, that create these, spatially segregated spaces, around the planet, and, puts up walls and cuts down rainforests and puts up palm oil plantations. There's all this environment making that we're doing, and then what's going on for us politically, experientially, psychologically. So I think Gestalt therapy, if it can be worked with in that way, as I say, takes it out of the therapy office and brings it more out into the world, and becomes a process not just of healing your childhood wounds, but this whole inquiry into how we make the world, and how that gives rise to what we feel and believe and think and all the rest of it. So Julie and Francois, is that sort of useful as a, yeah, thumbs up? Great. Okay, so I will see if we have anything else on the. Okay, Lisa, should I be, Mary, should I be reading Lisa or Rachel first?
Lisa was first.
Okay. You please say more about what is meant, looks like to legitimize the field of eco-psychology through academic rigor, whose voices are defining? Well, that's a good question. It's all about the intellectual politics, the academic politics, right? So if the second generation of eco-psychology was really saying the only way to legitimize the field is through sort of conventional psychology. So the first generation, kind of this loosey-goosey, countercultural, philosophical, experiential, project, but it's not really psychology. So the second generation comes along and says, we're the psychologists, we'll take it from here, thank you. I'm being a little sarcastic, but the idea was to align eco-psychology with conventional psychology because that's the way to legitimize the field. And one way to think about legitimacy is in terms of like theories around paradigm shifts, because paradigms shift when the ways of trying to solve the problems aren't working. And so that sort of makes a paradigm rock, because if it's not answering the questions, and there's more and more, you have to keep adding more and more little bits and pieces and duct taping things on to try to make the old ways make sense. And at a certain point, it all just sort of crumbles, and then you need a new paradigm. And so, so I'm saying that the way the mainstream tries to connect psyche and nature, it's just not, it just doesn't have any depth to it. It's not really addressing the crisis. It's not touching into the heart of this thing. And so for me, it lacks legitimacy because it's not very useful, and it doesn't have, it's not adequate to the situation. And so, so I'm trying to suggest, in a way, it's not that I use this language typically, but maybe it's useful in terms of illustrating, a new paradigm, which is more adequate in terms of answering the questions that the field raises about how is, like if we're only connecting psyche and nature, because that's what the mainstream approaches allow us to do, and politics is over in the society corner, but we don't do politics, then how is this field at all engaged in this historical moment? Like, how is it at all, and if it can't connect its theory and its practice to social change in any kind of convincing way, then it's not adequate to the times, because we need historical change, we need social change, we need like radical structural change. And as I say, if you go on the Ecopsychology journal, and all you're seeing are articles about how, this sort of study where 12 people found, that they were happier after spending 20 minutes a week, in their backyard looking at the birds. Like, I mean, of course they're happier, but how does this, connect with this moment? How does this answer the big questions? And so if I'm trying to introduce sort of intellectual traditions and modes of scholarship that sort of more convincingly or satisfyingly touch into these realities that are so demanding right now, then for me that gives a certain legitimacy. And but these are always interpretations, they're always debatable, they're always needing dialogue around what we consider to be good scholarship. And in any university setting, anybody who's done grad work will tell you this, there's no consistency on any of this. It's just a matter of who you can get into a room on your committee who sort of agrees with your research. And, you know, and if you're working with a prof who's like really on board and then they go on tenure or they retire or something and you've lost that person, well, then you've lost your legitimacy because you've lost the relationship that made it legitimate. And that's how knowledge production works. So it's a process of persuasion and demonstration, and it's all a matter of what camp you're in, because, you know, I could say this stuff till, you know, I'm blue in the face in most, you know, conventional mainstream psychology departments, and it would all just be blah, 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 you know? So it's really, you know, what's your community and what's, who are the people you're in conversation with, and what makes sense in terms of actually moving something forward. And so it's really about the, you know, if we can form an eco-psychological community where, yeah, this way of looking at things makes sense, and these are good intellectual frameworks, and this allows us to do things we wouldn't otherwise think to do, then for me, that's what it's about. It's not about knockdown arguments where I say, you know, I'm right and you're wrong, and here's my proof. You know, I don't really work that way. It's a process of living. It's about what moves our lives forward, what helps make sense to an organism coping with an environment. To get back to the Gestalt kind of way of looking at things. You know, we tend to think of academic work or scholarly work or intellectual work as somehow outside of life, as if, you know, the questions I have aren't bodily hungers that I have that I'm trying to satisfy. So when you think of scholarship that way, then it's, you know, the legitimacy comes through the satisfaction, through the bodily process of moving forward and feeling enlivened by our engagement with the ideas and with what it opens for us. So I hope that he's partially answered your question. I'm trying to remember who's that. That was Lisa. Yeah. So hopefully, Lisa, Lisa's, there's several screens. I can't see you, Lisa, but there you are. Thank you. Yes. Good. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so we've just got a few minutes to go. Let's see, Rachel, Andy, have you seen any inspiring examples of radical eco-psychology impacting the deeper roots of social paradigms and thinking that you were just referring to over the course of your career? So inspiring examples. Garrett Burnwell, I think, is on this call, and he's been enormously inspiring for me, and so I'm just really excited that you get to meet him in weeks 11, 12, and 13. So I'll mention him. Phoenix Smith, who there was a video of her that I put on the first one readings. She's developed the Alliance for Ecotherapy and Social Justice. So, you know, I talk about this triangle of mind, psyche, nature, and society. So she's bringing ecotherapy, which talks about, you know, the interrelationships between therapeutic interrelationship between psyche and nature. And she adds the society corner, bringing in a justice perspective. And anything that brings those three corners of the triangle, and these three words, by the way, are very problematic: psyche, society, and nature, because, you know, they're abstracted from one another, and so their typical way we understand them are very ideologically loaded. But for the purposes of you know, the discussion, she adds that society piece. And that it just really deepens what ecotherapy means. And so I think of her work, as I said in my lecture, as a kind of third generation exercise. Certainly some of the reading, I think one of the readings for this week, I think I put in, if it's not for next week, I can't remember, Alicia Jones and David Siegel's article on unsettling eco-psychology. You know, that's a radical eco-psychological exercise. You know, relating back to some of the things I was saying off the top of the session about needing to understand, you know, whose land we're on and what's the history of the place. So that you're bringing in that society and history corner of the triangle when you do that. So, you know, this is become because I'm trying to find simple ways for people to get a handle on what I mean by radical eco-psychology. This triangle is really my handle. You know, anytime you're integrating those three corners in a way that really deepens and unsettles, to my mind, you're doing radical eco-psychology, third generation eco-psychology. I think of Mary Watkins' work at Pacifica, you know, in this light as well. I mean, I think I can't speak for her, but she's always been concerned about more understanding the psyche in social context, and questions of liberation and justice. And so she developed the program, or is involved in developing the program at Pacifica, to maintain that focus, which typically hasn't been the case in the first two generations of eco-psychology. So I think of her work is quite radically eco-psychological as well as some of the work of Joanna Macy, and the ways, especially the way the work that reconnects has been sort of unsettled a bit lately, and going deeper into the society corner of the triangle, and you know, looking at more anti-oppression lens within the work that reconnects, and that's been a really good development as well, I think. So there's lots of stuff going on, but I think we're at a moment in the field, maybe this is a way to finish for today, where there's a kind of building toward a third generation, a kind of mobilizing. You know, what I'm trying to do is get behind that. I don't pretend to be authoring it at all. I think there's a lot of sort of agitation around the field and how it needs to get more on board in these ways. So I'm trying, in my writing right now, I'm just trying to create some grounds for a third generation. As I say, it's been you think it's going to be a simple exercise, and then you sit down to write it, and it's there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of more change I've had to go through on a personal level, and ways of being involved in the world I've had to do in order to really get myself in the right place to write the book. So it's a very demanding field, eco-psychology. It's super exciting. You know, I can't think of anything richer to be doing with one's life. And it'll really put you through your paces and unsettle you in really, you know, gorgeous ways. So maybe that's my way of wrapping for today in terms of what you can expect for the next 13 weeks. I hope there wasn't anything. I think that was the last question, Mary. Oh, new questions. Oh, no.
Yeah, there was one comment by Stephanie, but other than that, I think we did it.
Stephanie, I've said, however, that the society that violates non-human nature is the same society that violates human nature. That really stuck. So Stephanie was saying that the line that stuck from the book was actually, you know, is about this understanding that if you're trying to connect psyche and nature, for me, if you're just connecting psyche and nature without the society piece, you're connecting psyche and nature in a very individualistic way. And then you haven't changed anything. You're just maintaining this individualistic ideology. So we got to connect psyche and nature by going the long way around that triangle through society. And so that's what that quote from my book was pointing toward. Yeah, because we have a system that violates life in general, that includes our own human life. And certainly the way our society is stratified, some people get, you know, tremendously oppressed by this system. And we need to connect the dots between all of that if we're going to really meet this moment. Okay, so I think that's it for today. So thank you all for being here. I'm really sorry I can't just sort of, I see all your faces and I wish I could just connect more with all of you. So why don't I thank you all for being here today, and thank you for those viewing the video who couldn't be here but are watching the recording. And we'll see you next week. So people who want to, I'm going to end the recording now. For people who want to stick around, please, even though I'm signing off, I'm just signing off for the sake of the recording. So stick around and we'll see about the breakout rooms. So stopping recording now.